A few months ago I made a video all about compact cassette, and during the course of that video I demonstrated the different Dolby noise reduction systems. Now that video generated quite a big response, and a number of people asked why didn't I go into the DBX noise reduction system. Well, in the video I did mention there were other systems out there other than Dolby, but there are actually more than you might be aware of. For example, Philips had DNL, JVC had ANRS and Super ANRS, and arguably the best noise reduction system of all came from Telefunken and was called HiCom. And HiCom 2. That was licensed out to manufacturers such as Iowa and Rotel, but perhaps most notably of all, Nakamichi used it. Now they're not known for messing around with things, so perhaps HiCom was the best noise reduction system of all, arguably. But in this video we're going to talk about DBX. Now I've got a standalone DBX encoder / decoder here. The model number is 224. It works just like the Dolby system. You have to run your recordings through this to encode them with the DBX encoding, and then when you want to play them back you have to decode them through it as well. In fact, it's even more important than it is on Dolby, because Dolby you could listen to a Dolby B recording without a decoder and it would sound fine. On DBX, if you listen to a DBX recording without a DBX decoder, it sounds terrible. But I'm not here to talk about tape. What I want to talk to you about today is DBX Disc.
I'm sorry, did you say DBX Disc?
Yes, I did. DBX Discs, they're vinyl records encoded with the DBX noise reduction system, and they're only really playable back through a DBX decoder. They can be identified with this sticker that's on the outer sleeve. Now, in this popular science issue from 1979, there's an article all about the newly introduced DBX discs, and it goes into quite a bit of information, and it helps me to explain to you what the benefits of them are. So according to this, a master recording of live music can have over 90 decibels of dynamic range, whereas a vinyl record could only have somewhere around about 60 decibels of dynamic range. Therefore, you've got to compress the music down to get it onto the piece of vinyl. Now, what is dynamic range? Well, according to this, it's basically the difference between the loudest sound and the quietest sound during a piece of music or a performance. So, if we look at Wikipedia, just to back this up, a 78 RPM record had a dynamic range of 40 decibels, but that reduced to 30 after you played it a few times. A vinyl microgroove phonograph record, which is basically a normal piece of vinyl nowadays, could yield perhaps 55, it says, to 65 there, and some of the outer rings, if you were very clever and you're mastering and all that, you can get it up to perhaps 70 decibels, but still nowhere near the original master tape. So your master tape on the left here, we've got that 100 decibels of dynamic range. So the DBX encoder works like this. They encode this in their labs or whatever and squash it down so it fits into about 50 decibels, which is enough to get it onto a piece of vinyl. And then you've got your decoder at home, you decode the encoded piece of vinyl, it stretches that out again, expands it back to the original 100 decibels of dynamic range. So effectively, at home you're now listening to the same quality, or you're supposed to be able to, as the original master tape recording. So given all the hype, I'm anxious to try this out for myself. Now, the DBX decoder I got came from eBay. Didn't cost so much because the person wasn't sure whether it was working or not because they didn't have any discs for it, but it all seems to light up fine. All I need to do with this is run a tape loop through it. So the output from my amp goes into the input on this, and then the output from this goes back into the amp, and then I can switch between this or not depending on whether I'm playing a DBX disc. It's got level adjustments which adjust the volume from this to get it to match the other pieces of equipment in your setup. Now, the discs that I've got to play on it are not the best titles, but it's all I could find at the time off eBay. But this should be a good demonstration of whether the thing works or not. Now, Pramlata's hips I've got here. You can see we've got the sticker on the front there, and it's warning us that it's only to be used with a DBX decoder, and of course it mentions it's got that full dynamic range. Now, inside there's a nice piece of card that explains all about the whole DBX encoding and decoding and system and all the rest of it. Quite interesting, and I'll take some high-res pictures of that and put links to those in the video description if you want to read through all of it. But just to summarise what it says, basically a DBX disc will always be recorded on heavy-weight virgin vinyl, as in unused vinyl. Recorded from the original master tapes as well, which is a good thing. But those top two things, that could be any old record. The bottom three are unique to DBX. No background record surface noise. Reduced pops and clicks, and that 100 decibels of dynamic range. Now the record itself is indistinguishable from any other vinyl record other than we've got the DBX encoded logo on here, and again another warning on the other side telling us to use only with a DBX disc decoder. So I've got my decoder put into my HiFi setup. But before I play any music to you, I just want to temper your expectations about what you're going to hear through YouTube. The reason is a few weeks ago I did a video about Ultra HD Blu-ray and tried to talk about HDR and deep colour. Now in that video I mentioned a few times you wouldn't be able to see the effect through YouTube. You can't see HDR through there, you can't see deep colour, and especially not when I recorded it with my camera. However, a lot of the comments under that video were along these lines.
Well, this HDR stuff's a load of rubbish. On my laptop screen, it just looks a bit darker and a bit red as well.
So in an attempt to avoid a repeat, when I play you back music on this video, bear in mind it's been recorded on this camera through these tiny little microphones. Now that's not really the problem, the microphone, because after that it goes through a whole load of processes before you get to hear it. So I'm listening to a nice analog sound in my house, whereas you're listening to some sort of digital re-encoded mess. Effectively, it's the difference between this and this. So one more time, it's not going to sound good on YouTube. Hopefully that's that cleared up now, and we can have a listen to Pramlatter's Hips. Now both of these records are second hand, and the Pramlatter's Hips one had been open before, so you can expect some sort of dust and cracks and pops and clicks and things, but I think that's a good test because the DBX is supposed to reduce those. Also, there's a word of warning on that piece of card that was in there. It's warning you not to turn your volume up too loud because there's no sound when the music isn't playing, and you could accidentally turn it all the way up thinking nothing's happening, and then all of a sudden the music starts and you blow your speakers up. A bit of a Marty McFly kind of moment. Anyway, let's have a quick listen to this one on the intro without the DBX turned on. Right, that's pretty crackly. And another thing I want to mention, there was some guy digging up down at the bottom of the road, so you might be able to hear that on there. You'll be able to hear quite a bit of background noise, probably me breathing as well. But anyway, let's try it again, but with the DBX turned on. Okay, so one thing you will be able to hear through YouTube is that those cracks and pops that were at the beginning of the record on the lead-in pretty much disappeared once I switched the DBX on, but the thing you won't be able to hear is how lovely and rich the sound is. The benefit of the increased dynamic range over a standard vinyl record is immediately obvious. If you close your eyes, you could swear that the musicians were actually in the room. And then at the end of the track, when the audience give their applause, it was enough to make the hairs on the back of my neck stand up because it was as though there were a load of people in the room as well. I've listened to all sorts of music formats over the years, lots of lossless and high-res and Blu-ray audio and DVD audio, SACD. This is right up there with the best of them. This is one of the best things I've ever heard in my life. I was completely blown away. Now if you were to switch it off, you can hear the record, but it sounds really harsh and tinny and nasty, so you can't play it without the DBX decoder. But once you play it with it, honestly, it's really amazing. I was completely floored by how great this thing sounds. One thing I did notice, you can turn the volume way up, much louder than I'd ever normally listen to music, and it still sounds excellent. Unfortunately though, it was peeking out the microphone on the camera. Now I want to play you a couple of sections here when the music stops and just listen to how quiet things go. In fact, you can even hear the musicians shuffling around a little bit just before the master tape cuts off on this section. So let's have a listen. So that's the end of the demonstration part of this video. There's no point going into that too much because you can't hear the quality, unfortunately, at your end. However, I could, and I was amazed by it. I haven't heard anything this great in years. I want to know where I can get more DBX encoded discs. Well, my record was from 1980. So looking on the Discogs website, they've got a DBX series page on there. They've got a paragraph they've copied off Wikipedia, and in there it says there were over 1,100 albums that were brought out between 73 and 82. Now they only know about 60 of those, but if we look down the right hand side here, you can see most of those are from 1979, 1980, 81, that kind of period. I found one here that was from 1973, but it says it was a promo. So this has got me thinking, what happened to all these 1,100 titles that came out between 1973 and 1982? Well, looking at the issue of Popular Science from 79, they're talking about it like it's a new technology. He's saying it's the new DBX process records. And this issue of Billboard, also from 1979, they're talking about the new DBX Discs like it's a new thing that's just come out. Incidentally, in this article here, this bit interested me at the top left. There was a survey by Nautilus Recordings. They made audiophile records, like, ones with a heavyweight vinyl and things. Their average customer was 25 years old and had a stereo system valued at more than $2,000 in 1979. I was interested, how much would that be nowadays? So I put it into the inflation calculator. $2,000 in 79 is $6,500 nowadays. Imagine, how many people do you know with a $6,500 HiFi? But back to my original question, what happened between 1973 and 1982? Was the Wikipedia article wrong and the disc didn't actually come out in 73? Well, it did. Well, thereabouts. I managed to find mention of them in this issue of Popular Science from 1974. Notice it's got the future reusable space shuttle mentioned on the front there. Quite interesting. But inside, amongst the adverts for men smoking cigarettes sat on a rock, or a topless chap trying to teach his dog how to smoke sat on a log, and an advert for British Leyland trying to flog off the awful marina to the poor people in the US. Got to apologise for that. Sorry to everyone in the US if you did buy one of those. Very dark day for the British car industry. Anyway, later on there's an article in here where a chap is listening to the first DBX disc at a press conference, and he's very impressed with them. So if they were out in 1974, what happened between then and 1979? There is mention of this in the article. Apparently DBX couldn't really get anyone interested in bringing out DBX encoded discs, so the technology kind of lay dormant for a number of years until 79, when a company called BSR bought DBX, and they put a big push on the technology. They're the ones that got all the record companies to introduce their records on this new DBX disc. Who are BSR, by the way? Well, they're the Birmingham Sound Reproducers. It's a UK company. They made record players, and interestingly for me, in the 80s, they manufactured the Rotronics wafer drive for the ZX Spectrum. That was an external disk drive type of thing. I had one of those in about 84. Anyway, they went bust in 85, so that explains kind of the death of the DBX encoded disc. But what about this business with 1,100 albums released with DBX encoding? Well, looking at this issue of Billboard from 1981, look at this bit on the right here. DBX encoded disc to hit 200 in 81. Now, they say that there's going to be a total of 200. Not 200 coming out, there's a total DBX number, 200 in 81. Now, given that they kind of died off in 81, 82, I don't think those 1,100 ever came out. I think that number is wrong. Looking through that list of 60 titles that we do know came out in a DBX version, there aren't too many there that really appeal to me. Most of it is jazz or classical. However, I've found a couple that I've decided to buy, and that's the Who's, Who Are You, and the Police with Zenyatta Mondata. But I just want to talk again for a brief second about this business of dynamic range. You see, the idea of having 100 decibels of dynamic range on the original master recording is all well and good, but those are under ideal circumstances. The vast majority of recordings never use that kind of dynamic range. For example, most classical music perhaps uses maybe 30 decibels nowadays, and if you look at some of the older recordings, for example the early Beatles stuff, 10 decibels, the Rolling Stones Satisfaction, apparently that only has 3 decibels of dynamic range. Most modern recordings don't get anywhere near 100, and therefore they're probably not worthy of having a DBX disc version. So back in the day, these chaps and that lovely lady at the bottom left there, they were picking the recordings that would sound good on DBX discs, and of course not everything would. But a good side effect to that was that they were picking things from the original master tapes that had been well recorded. So if you saw a DBX sticker on a disc, you know that you're getting a good recording. I've listened to loads of different types of formats over the years, and I've got to say, if these things were still around nowadays and modern recordings were coming out on them, and you had a choice of buying a normal vinyl record or one with that DBX sticker on there, I would buy that DBX one every time, even if it costs, say, half as much again. So if you do ever get the opportunity to listen to a DBX disc, I mean, it's not that difficult yourself to go and pick up a decoder off eBay and a couple of records and stick them in your system just to listen to it, because it is absolutely astoundingly good. But anyway, that's it for the moment. As always, thanks for watching.
Well, I don't know what all the fuss is about. It sounds exactly the same as everything else does through my laptop speakers.